For sure you
Do it.
Let's start with a fun one, guys. What are some of your most memorable recent pitches, and what makes them stand out?
Well, wait. First of all, can I just set the groundwork here, which is all of us have probably heard like a million pitches, and I would just want to say, what is the number one thing? I'm going to set it up for you though, but when you get into a pitch after the chit chat, what is the most likely thing that's going to happen? I'll give you a hint. Like if you have any kind of presentation that's going to happen and you need to use any kind of computer or
it's gonna
technology.
malfunction. It's gonna malfunction.
Always.
It never works.
Every time.
Yeah.
Technology.
That's kind of a
doesn't work.
newer,
Yeah.
at least for us, it's sort of a newer, people bringing in sizzle reels, and I don't know, I used to hear the reality TV pitches and they were explosions, and they brought in all these sizzle reels, and it was all about that. And for us, it was always just kind of the writer coming in and kind of quietly telling us their idea for their show. And I'm finding more and more, a lot of more of a media presentation. Presentation, yeah.
I work at a tech company, and our tech never works with the so it's automatically we just look like idiots at first. We're like, oh, hold on, this is gonna work.
Yeah.
Or when there's a Skype call, the Skype pitches, I don't take
I
those
really
ideas.
hate Skype pitches.
They don't work. They do not work.
I had somebody had in their
Rather do it
presentation,
outside.
their backup was a mini iPad, but they were pitching to 5 or 6 of us, and then some of
So
the
you gather around?
Yeah, then we all gathered around this little screen, and then 2 of the producers seemed to want to see it. I would hope they've seen it
already?
many times,
Yeah.
but then they crowd in and
Probably
around
not.
us to watch.
That's really
Yeah.
funny because there's those times where they'll just press play and it'll be projecting, you're watching it, and they're watching you.
They're watching you
Yeah,
as you
that's
perform. You're like,
seriously.
oh,
Yeah.
I see what you're doing. It's just
You
very
get the
smart
occasional,
choice.
you see them like, she's laughing. Yeah.
Can you guys hear us okay?
No.
Oh, you can't hear us?
Good.
We were talking about Donald Trump. Yeah.
It was really funny.
So we figured that all out.
These are dangerous.
Does
Real
this work?
dangerous.
Hello. This one.
Karaoke next.
Okay.
Is this thing on? And then of course, I'm going to let you do your original, your actual pitches, but then there's
You
always.
mean memorable in a good way or bad way?
Either.
Or either?
Grant has a good one. I'm gonna
Grant's
put
got a
you on
good
the
one.
spot.
Which one?
The one with the beer.
Oh,
one
there's
with
a
the
couple.
beer.
This one was a few years ago, and sorry to repeat myself if anyone has heard this already.
Oh, sorry.
This was this is like 4 years ago, and Matthew McConaughey's brother, Rooster McConaughey, who's now famous because he has his
Rooster.
own show. I'm not sure what network it's on, but he has his own show now where it's sort of like Shark Tank. But go watch that, you'll get a sense of who I'm talking about. He showed up once with an animated pitch, basically based on his life and the fact his son is named Miller Lite, which is true. So he showed up to our pitch with a case full of Miller Lite and was at least like 4 or 5 deep when he got in there. And every notes call you'd have with him, he would inevitably be, I remember the one, he was here in Austin, I think, at Maudie's or somewhere with a giant margarita. And I know that because he told us. He's like, we've had about 4 of these. This will make this notes call better, but he was a real trip. More recently, on the other side of, it wasn't a bad pitch, and this may be a personal thing, I hate when people sing in pitches. It makes me really uncomfortable.
We get a lot of singing pitches at the CW. You can imagine that.
Right? But this couple was from an 80s band. It was the Nelson Brothers. And they came in, super nice. They were great. And the pitch was fine. They came in and started serenading with their guitars. And it's just me, maybe it's just me, but I was just like, oh my God, like wide-eyed. And they're beautiful voices, beautiful song, but they played an entire song that was probably on one of their albums. And I just sat there the whole time like, this is, and again, maybe it's just me. Somebody might have loved it. Kathleen probably loved it. She loves Nelson, so.
Again, it's like the same thing
Yeah.
with
You're like-
when you're watching and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, and you're just in the, it's an
It's too
intimate
personal,
thing.
yeah.
It's too personal.
Yeah.
So you're just like, cool, awesome. Like, you're sweating.
Right.
I gotta go.
Sweating is another one. Profuse sweating. It's really awkward.
It's gonna happen.
So also when
Make sure you
writers-
do that. Wait, so do that or don't do that? Sweating.
When they do sweat.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a
Okay.
puddle. It's, by the way, first of all, we understand that there's been a lot of preparation into pitching, and we know that there's a lot of work on the writer's side and the producer's side to come into us, and that's really nerve-wracking. So, you want to be as polite and give them as much time and respect as possible. Sometimes it's just so painful when you see, I don't know if you, we've had one we've had a number of people come in, and usually you start with a personal story, why this is important to you, and some of the people have like teary eye, cry, like my dad, and you're just so feeling for them, but then you don't know, do I make light and move on, or do I, acknowledge, do we talk about the dad, and then I would highly recommend you writers out there, and I don't know how you guys feel, but having some kind of documentation notes with you.
Absolutely.
Do you have a thing? Okay, because I always am so nervous for people when they come in. Just
I'm nervous when a
nothing.
waiter doesn't write down my order.
Yeah.
I freak out.
When it's like a 40-minute
I can write that
pitch
down
and you're
for you.
like, there's no, me? When there's like there's like a 30, 40-minute pitch coming and there's no notes or paper, I get nervous for them. So we don't mind that at all. I don't mind. I think it makes it more comfortable that's, I think, a new thing. It used to be sort of more of a show.
Hopefully not 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It's very long. 20 minutes.
20.
That's funny because there are times where those pitches run very, very long, and you're looking at how many more notes they have, and you're trying to estimate, like, as
Totally.
they're flipping.
6
Counting
pages.
Oh,
pages.
now they're getting into the characters. I thought we already did that. And then it's like they're flipping again, and you're like kind of getting underneath the page, and we're like, we've got about 25 more minutes of this.
Or the ones where they keep talking and talking and talking, and and it's complicated. We get a lot of mythology, dystopian stuff. You're really listening, and it's like your brain's hurting. And then it's like 15, 20 minutes in. Yeah, I get 40-minute pitches, and then they go, and that's the end of Act 1. You're like,
So it's basically not all fun and games. I mean, are there other examples where you kind of know immediately that a pitch is right for you and you could just say, yes, we're in, I don't need to see 17 other pages of your document?
Like, would we cut them off and say, we're buying this? You would save your breath? No, that would be fun. No, I let them get all the way
Good
through.
tactic.
Stop right there.
Done.
Here's the
Business
check.
affairs will call.
Now,
How much do you need?
Let's talk dollars.
Well, what about with like the mega producers? I mean, where you've got the Anthony Zoikers for CSI. When he comes in with a new pitch, this is a guy that's made billions.
Right.
Do you hear him out? Does he even have to pitch? How does that work
Yeah.
for the mega showrunner?
No, at least for us, everybody is pitching. It's an even playing field in that how they are coming in and letting us know what their show is and having us decide on the show. Now, obviously, yeah, if I have if there's a big producer who's at our in-house studio who therefore we've maybe even heard that they are working on a show for us and they walk in, I understand that that's different, but it's no different in how they have to go through and lay out their pitch. There's the days of kind of, just saying I'm a giant producer and here's 3 sentences and you need to buy this are over. Certainly where I work, it's over.
How is, as we're talking about like the competition from everybody else, and you mentioned buying from your own studio, how has the competition from everybody else really changed the scripted game and the buying process? I mean, that if you hear a really good pitch and they're going to take it to 17 other outlets and Netflix has more money than God, how does that change your approach?
Straight to series. It's great. I sit right next to our BA, our head of business affairs, and now if somebody walks in, like you were talking about before, big producer, big director, and there's also a script, and we have to compete with HBO or Netflix or FX, a lot of times we have to go. The deal on the table is straight to series. That's where the negotiation starts, which is kind of a tricky place to be.
And I think for us at a studio, more traditional studio like 20th, we understand that part of the game. And if we want to buy something that we like, we'll do our typical author, like we're going to develop it, we're going to buy a script. And if Hulu or Netflix comes along and is like, hey, we're giving you series, we get it. We're not going to compete with that. We're not going to change our business to say, green light, we're giving you 13 episodes, you're on the air. It's just not going to happen. So we understand it. The business is shifting. I think maybe we'd step up to wherever we could be, to what our appetite is. But we understand we're going to lose stuff too.
Same.
Certain places.
When I started at HBO 8 years ago, and there was no such thing as Netflix or Hulu, you existed, but not in the original programming space. And so now, it's much different. And we also can't it's not that we can't compete, because we've done it obviously with True Detective and now with Sharp Objects. We've ordered things, straight to series, but we still only program Sunday nights, so it's a little bit limited in terms of real estate. We can't just be like, we want to win this, so we're going to give you 13. We actually have to look at the schedule and be like, well, where would that actually fit? So it's a little, we know we're going to miss out on stuff, and there are things that are and I know we're going to talk about this, but packages come in, and if there's a producer, director, or writer, or script, you're like, it would be silly for me to put it into development, so I guess it's going to go elsewhere. You
guys are doing just fine.
We're guys, it's really hard.
I mean, I guess, it depends on the show, but I think the showrunner and the writer is also looking for the best home for their show, and the best home may be the place that's offering 13, or the best home may be the place that they just really want it on that air, and maybe they're not at 13, but I think that showrunner may still have something to think about. I don't know. And certainly, all things being equal, if everybody's at the same offer, then I think they're really thinking about where does the show have the best chance to thrive.
Yeah, and then that's where sort of marketing comes in, that sort of discussion. And so for us, I think a lot of times we do have our marketing and PR folks in the loop from an early stage, because if they get it and they know how to roll this out, especially when there's so much great TV out there, I think to make a case to the creators, like, we love your show, we get your show creatively, but we're also gonna really support it. I think that has to be part of the equation too.
Does the development process, does the straight to series pickup really change the development process? I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff that gets picked up straight series and that never makes it on air.
So the first two things we did were straight to series, Casual and Difficult People, and it changes the development process in that I think it makes it the creative process less theoretical. So what I mean by that is when you're giving notes or writing scripts that you're shooting in 3 weeks, your idea versus my idea, like, it better be the best idea. And because if it's great, we'll all look great. And if it's bad, we're all going to look really bad. So, like, let's be honest about how we feel. Because I think a lot of times when you're just developing scripts that you're not sure are going to go anywhere, you can have the relationship can be contentious, where you're sort of fighting over or arguing or over-examining something that may not be necessarily worth it. But when you know that you're actually going to turn the camera on, you have to be honest with sort of the feedback and thoughtful about the feedback.
I also think this straight to series idea, this sort of tendency to do that now, has changed the development process, especially for us. I know AMC does this too, but we've been doing a lot more, like, a script will come in that we've developed, we've done X amount of drafts, and it's good, it's promising. We'll then do a little overview period. We'll put together a couple weeks of a writer's room and have them beat out a seasonal arc, because look, we put a lot of money into this stuff. You want to know where it's going. You want to know what you're buying for 8 or 10 episodes. And so this new sort of everybody's doing it kind of thing, that's become a tactic for us too. Is like, okay, we'll take the script, but then we'll put together a room for you, and we want to see another script in a Bible or a format or something like that. So that's very new and very becoming more common for us too.
Just quickly, for us, it's hard for the CW to compete just monetarily against other buyers. But so what we try to do is, we really don't compete, in that way. What we try to do is find writers that we love working with, and have relationships with, and try to find projects that we hope that they're interested in. So do it the backwards way, if it's a book property or just an idea, to try to entice them, because that's key, is the writer.
Given the amount of competition, how much have you guys seen, we've talked about this, how much have you seen the total number of pitches change? I mean, are you getting pitched more, or is it or less?
The amount of pitches coming to the door is down over the past couple of years, but our buying isn't completely down. We buy 45, 50 ideas in a given pitch season, and we shoot about 8 pilots, and this year we shot 7 pilots and 5 just went to series. So I don't know, the numbers ultimately I think are healthy. I think we were nervous when fewer were coming through the door, but I think for us it was just the ones that I think there were just more coming through the door that we wouldn't have bought anyway. And that's just from a place where I'm buying for a very specific place at CBS. So I don't know, that's been my experience.
Yeah, I agree with that.
it's just surprising that, given that the landscape is there's so much out there to choose from, that you guys are hearing less. I mean, it seems.
Well, there's probably more pitches, but each buyer is hearing fewer, right? I mean, maybe if you asked an agent or an independent studio, they might say they're hearing more than they ever have before, because they get to then take it out to the marketplace. But now you're talking to the buyers, and it's just more diffuse.
How do you know when as you're hearing these pitches, obviously tech failures notwithstanding, how do you know when something's right for you guys? I mean, have you heard pitches where you're like, this is a hit show, but it's not for CBS?
I have heard pitches that I feel are not for CBS, for sure. You mean, yeah, certainly they didn't kind of have enough. Yeah, certainly I've heard pitches that I think are good but didn't quite belong with what we're doing. Definitely. I don't know. I think we're going to say a lot of the same things here, but when you are hearing a great pitch, you hear how personal it is. You hear how it's a story that this writer has to tell, and it can be something kind of small and just about one character, or it can be, when I heard Jonah Nolan pitch Person of Interest, which is large mythology and all this, it was intensely personal in the way that he made it, and about, I won't get into his pitch, but about him growing up, and you just knew that he had to tell kind of his story or this story through the prism of this much kind of larger kind of high concept for us show.
Yeah, and it's great when when you can tell, when the pitch is going really well, you can tell that the writer is having a lot of fun, and it's just kind of coming out. And you can tell, like you were saying, that it's personal, and you end up talking not necessarily about the plot or even the characters necessarily. You're talking sort of about the larger themes, and like for instance with Casual, we didn't really we talked a little bit about sort of the brother-sister relationship, but more about sort of relationships in general, and just kind of throwing stories back and forth, and for us, because TV is kind of like a novel, while the show is serialized, I think it was about finding what the experience of the show is going to be, sort of vis-a-vis that writer's voice and that writer's perspective, and when they just start talking about it, and you can tell that this is the idea that they themselves think about all the time. They may have 8 other ideas, but this is the one that they think about, in their morning bath. Right. That's when it starts to click, where you're like, okay, this is something special.
Well, to that end, by the way, because we do a pretty extensive pre-development. I'm sure you guys probably do too. So we don't, meaning that, we try to avoid having writers and producers come in with pitches that really aren't right for us, because we just don't want to waste their time, even if it's not only preparing for it, but just the hour of sitting there and the driving, the parking in LA. So, what's more painful is when we hear a pitch and it really does seem right for us, but it's just not right. It's just not inspiring, and you can feel that in the way that he was talking about. Just you don't feel the passion. It feels like they may have developed it because they think it's what you want, and it does hit 9 out of 10 check boxes, but you're just not really feeling the world and the characters in a way that you can see 7 seasons of it, and you're not feeling the love for those characters, and that's really what you.
There's a lot of great writers and a lot of great shows out there, but there's fewer voices, and I think that's kind of what, at least for us, sort of separates the people, certain shows from the pack. I think it's like if that voice is sort of starting to shine through.
Yeah, their point of view, the specific point of view. We always say that we use the term voice a lot. You want to find that voice. Seth MacFarlane has a different voice than a lot of other people out there telling stories. He can tell the same story that you've seen in 100 different shows, but the way he tells it through his point of view is going to be completely different, which I think is huge. I look for that a lot in a pitch, and if you can recognize that this person's telling a story that you may have heard before, but in a different way, that's a good check mark. And then also, if I start talking about it with them in the pitch, and 30, 40 minutes go by, you're like, that's a good sign. If you can just sit there and spitball on ideas,
There's so much
there's
instinct
something
involved,
there.
yeah. I agree. I think that I think that we all can probably agree that there are really no new stories, like short of them like adding on different kind of hook or mythologies, like, you know, like you can add a lot of stuff to it, but at the end of the day, it's a father-son story, it's a family story, it's whatever it is at its core, and finding someone who's just talking about something familiar to you in a new way, even as just a TV audience member, that's what you look for in the TV that you watch. So in a pitch, it's the same thing. I'm just like, am I moved by this? Am I so invested? Am I so excited by this idea? And that's kind of, there's a lot of instinct involved too.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to have like a B idea, you know, B plus idea, but just executed in an A plus way, rather than have like an A plus idea that's like amazing. Wow, that's just like, I've never thought of that. And then you hear it and you're like, interested in that character, you know, it's such a shame, but that's really important.
I mean, given all the competition, how important has it been about sticking to your brand identity? And, you know, is there a point where you kind of talk with, you know, the network executives and about what that is, or if that's evolving? I mean, is it important to stay in your lane, or will you continue to take big bets that really don't seem like something that would play on your specific counter network?
Well, I have a pretty strong point of view about that. I've been at the CW for over, you know, since the beginning of the CW, about over 9 years, and we started out pretty girly. It was Gossip Girl that launched us, and we were 18 to 34, and we were focused primarily on women, and we realized that that was, you know, too narrow as our brand identity, and we wanted to broaden. But we've always been 18 to 34 youthful. You know, that's really just it. And then every year when we you know, put on the air, we pick up a different type of show. I kind of hear it anecdotally from people, wow, I'm so surprised that the CW would do that type of show. But to me, we have been really staying in our lane. We've been, you know, aside from a shift to now we're 50-50, pretty 50-50 men and women, which I'm really happy about. We're sort of anything goes. So when we did Reign, you know, which is Mary Queen of Scots in the, you know, 16th century France, it was like a period piece. And I'm like, no, that's just youthful people who are, you know, the great soapy stuff that we love with a big idea. And we did, you know, The 100, and that's post-apocalyptic, and what? That's so dark. But no, it's like young people who are proactive and there's wish fulfillment to it. And then Jane the Virgin, wait, that's funny, that's a comedy, that's not really your thing. I'm like, no, but these are young people trying to figure out their lives with a bigger idea and crazy, you know, so the list goes on. But so to me, as a development exec, I want to do something else, and I want to give back to our loyal fans and our audience something that is going to, you know, be similar to what they have watched in the past, but, you know, and then a little something else. And of course, you know, we're not always right, and sometimes, you know, that's not exactly what they wanted, but we try to guess as best we can. But I think we try to, you know, we're brand managers. I mean, that's what we do, really, is just manage our brand and hope that we get it right. But we always want to build a little bit and just test it a tiny bit to see, you know, what our audience is interested in.
100 is my dad's favorite show, just so you know.
Oh, thank you.
He's always like, why
Shout
don't
out
you do
to
something
Jason
like that? I'm like, cool. I'm like, do you watch anything else on HBO? He's like, he watches Game of Thrones, but he's also like, The 100. He's like, thank God I still have that on Friday night. Okay, Dad?
Veep is my favorite show.
The best.
What I mean, in terms of, you touched a little bit about packaging that's becoming more and more the norm, especially in the straight to series era. Does that make the process easier for you guys or more challenging?
I have varied opinions about this, because I think there are some times where it's great and you're so excited about all the elements involved. But I've had such a wonderful experience developing an HBO where you start with the writer and idea and then build it on your own. And obviously so much of our jobs is working to meet great writers, great senior writers, great directors. You know what I mean? There's something so fulfilling about putting it together in-house that I appreciate a great package, I really do, and obviously we've had some success with it, but I still am like, don't worry, like you don't have to bring in a director, like I still will take a young writer's idea. I get a lot of joy in putting something together myself versus like the agents call and they're like, you got to hear this. It's the, you know, everybody's involved. And you're like, well, that's a lot of cooks.
You never
too,
hear
so.
a great pitch from a writer and go, God, I would have bought it if only there'd been a director attached.
100%. That's right. That's 100% right. Right. I think it can go either way. I see merit in both. But I still personally, for myself, love just like writer and then let's take it from there. Writer, great idea, point of view, let's take it from there.
You can't fake any of that other stuff.
Yeah.
Great writer, great point of view. You can package it all together and it'd be great, but at the end of the day, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's nothing good to direct. There's nothing good to put on the screen.
Yeah, it's basically an insurance plan a lot of times,
Yeah.
because it's like, oh, well, if it sucks, then you're like, well, we bet on this person, this person, this person. And so it doesn't necessarily make great TV. I think there are instances where it does, but
True
I
Detective.
think I agree. Yeah, like I think I agree with you in that I think a lot of the hits come from just someone believing in something that the entire town passed on or the entire town didn't get, and it took somebody to like say, I get it, and then just be patient with that writer and sort of bring it to life.
Put all
Those
the
are the
ingre-
most exciting ones, I
And
think.
put all the ingredients in it and cook it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the remakes that we've seen lately. MacGyver and Frequency, Lethal Weapon. All of these are coming back next season. They're in such high demand. How much of that trend is driven by the need to cut through the clutter in such a competitive landscape with 400 scripted shows on the air?
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess on the one hand, I can only buy what people are selling, right? So I guess the sellers are thinking about that. I mean, truly, when we're hearing our 250, 300 pitches, they're all, I heard Training Day in the same day that I heard 4 other pitches, that didn't necessarily have IP attached. And I think that when we were hearing those 5 pitches that day, we were listening for the same thing. And, Training Day, Will Bell wrote, and he was a cop in LA and basically told us his story of his training day. There wasn't a lot of talking about the movie. He talked about why he loved the movie and how it informed him as a cop, but then he really talked to us about his training day, which really became much more of our pilot story than anything with the film. So again, the great writers know how to give a reason for why they want to tell 200 stories through the prism of this show. So that's what we're listening for.
I mean, for us, Frequency is an interesting one because I don't know that our audience really, hopefully they remember the movie, but I'm not really sure that that's why they're coming. It's a big idea, It's a father-daughter story, at least in the series, where they're communicating through two different time periods, and that's the big idea for us. So that in itself, was an idea that came from a feature, and we were, really happy to have the feature people involved with it, and maybe the memory of the movie. But typically, it's because it's really to cut through the clutter, because it's a marketing play. We need anything we can to just be memorable, and either it's a big idea or it's a title that that they've heard of. It's Betty and Veronica and Archie in Riverdale, just to have some intrigue. And then of course, it always has to be great. It always has. It's never but just to have some interest, because there's such great. We're in peak TV. There's such great TV right now. You just need to find a way to break through.
I've been trying to remake Waterworld for years.
Bigger budget this time?
That's why I've been fired.
Right. Yeah.
I heard there was free breakfast here, so that's how I got on the panel.
Let's talk about a little bit about the mega producer. I mean, CBS's Chuck Lorre and NBC's got Dick Wolf, and you guys have Greg Berlanti, and ABC's got Shondaland. Is there an over-reliance on the mega producers, or is it kind of a safety play because there's really not enough fresh new voices out there?
I can speak to that too, because we have Lord and Miller on our roster at 20th, and they're about to have 3 shows on our air at once, which is 3 comedies on our air, which is at least half of them. I haven't done the math yet, but it's a lot. And most of our Sunday night schedule, at least half. So that happened because the shows they brought us were good. They went through the same development process. They didn't skip, to the front of the line. None of that happened. They went through the exact same process, and they stood out. They were good. They were all 3 are, grounded characters and relationships, but with one little twist, each of them. One hook, like you guys say, to help it stand out amongst the clutter. But everything else, very relatable, very grounded, in hopes that you can attract a big, broad audience who will understand who these characters are and go along for the ride.
Those guys are the best. I love
they're
those
good.
guys.
Everything they touch is
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah, but exact same process. I don't know. Like, we pass on a lot of, if Jerry Bruckheimer is our most prolific producer, we pass on probably way more Bruckheimer pitches than we buy. I mean, we're not doing anybody any favors by putting you into script development if we didn't think the show is right. And if Bruckheimer's going out with a show, they really believe in it, they're probably a better home for it than us if we didn't dig it. So I don't know. They come in, they pitch, and we buy it if we like it.
What's it like telling Jerry Bruckheimer no?
Thank you.
No, sorry.
Have you?
Sorry, Jerry.
I talked to somebody who is eight people below
And then run.
below his assistant.
In terms of Greg Berlanti, real quick, I would take anything from him. He's just an excellent producer. He's sort of good at every part of his job and a really great person too. And I also think part of what Grant was saying, in that they're there on the ground, know what your needs are, kind of talk to you frequently because they're in your camp, so you can sort of banter ideas on set they de facto have that inside scoop about what you're looking for. So that a lot of easy conversations come up, especially for us, it's the superhero stuff. Like, what about that superhero? That appeared in that show and kind of we liked, or there's just a lot of easy, casual conversations that might end up leading to insight that could lead to pitches, but it doesn't mean we put on everything. They have a lot of development. Greg in particular also does a great job grooming his writers, from staff writers up, so that he finds great showrunners with great individual voices. I'm sure they all do that, so that he knows, kind of has his eye on somebody to run his next show, and then he sort of godfathers it. So that's something I would recommend to anybody.
One of the biggest themes that have come out of the upfronts the past 2 years has been vertical integration and the need for networks to own a lot of their own programming. Do you think the demand for ownership is going to drive prices down, or will networks have to pay more to kind of ensure that these big pitches stay in-house?
That's a tough conversation. I mean, because we're owned by 2 studios, so it's even more complicated. But I feel like for us at least, so I thought I was going to come up with a really smart answer, by the way. Now I didn't but it's really a conversation mostly sort of collectively. We don't have 100% say in what we buy, So it kind of depends on what the studios want to do with it. Not as much the networks.
I think you're right. It has to be a conversation between networks and studios across the board. They've got to find that middle place. Otherwise, it's just going to be a tug of war where nobody wins. Ultimately, stuff gets passed on because you can't make whatever that deal is. It's a little easier when you have a sister studio and a sister network, but even then, you're going to have that conversation. Somebody's going to have to give. The business is changing so drastically that everybody's going to have to look at their numbers and be like, all right, we're willing to give you this if you take that.
That's right. I mean, there are a lot of stuff that we don't get because our studios want to take them other places, and other places. But and we don't have 100% control over that. Sometimes we just hear that something was picked up, and we're like, "What? You didn't even bring?" But they have their own strategies, they have their own business, and they have their own bottom lines, and that's what they're responsible for. So you just have to sort of respect that.
There's been a couple executive moves in the last couple weeks post upfronts. The most surprising one.
Don't go there.
Wait, is it
Don't
any
do
one
it.
of us?
Is it one of
This is
us?
great. It was
What
like a
did you
bucket
just
of slime.
report this
Yeah.
morning?
I did nothing. You can't prove anything. Bella. I'm talking about Bella at Universal Television, and the rumor is basically that she didn't sell enough to NBC, and this is, for those not familiar, it's NBC Studios' counterpart. How do you guys as executives balance servicing your vertically aligned networks while still fielding the demand to sell outside? I mean, when you look at Fox's schedule next year, I think 10 of 11 of the buys were from 20th.
Yeah. I don't think that's an accident. I think certainly the network hears pitches from every studio. They shot pilots from other studios. The ones that ended up succeeding happened to all, on the comedy side, happened to all be from 20th. As far as a studio handles, I can't tell them, I'm not sure what's going on over there, but as far as we go, we certainly go to Fox first with pretty much everything, unless there's a conversation to be had that, this isn't quite a Fox show, we all get it, we run it up the ladder, and what, as a studio, we need outside business, and we do. We have business at every network other than of the big 4. We have shows on all the other 3, which is a huge part of our business. So as much as we want to service Fox, give them the shows that make sense for them, it's very important for us to take shows to the other 3 networks and to have that business and to keep, and really more importantly, to keep those shows that are already on the air there, to keep them going, because that's when the studio really starts to succeed in success, after season 4 or 5. So it's very, very important. We haven't lost sight of that. But still, obviously, we have an entire network to service as well.
Bella, I've had the good fortune to work with her. We work on the Mindy project with her, and she I think is she's the, like an example of exactly what you want to be in terms of an executive. I think she's really nice. She's got great relationships with the talent, and she has great taste, and she's making the stuff that she loves. And I think for all of us up here, I think we all be the first people to tell you that we don't know what is going to be good next year. Like, I think we obviously we have to keep our jobs, and there's, a intersection between art and commerce, but at the end of the day, you're just going with your gut. And there's a lot of metrics that you can look at, and you can, help inform your decision making. But, I think Bella made decisions, and I don't know what the rumors are, but like I know she made great decisions creatively, and she made great shows that everybody in this audience is watching at this festival. So, to me, like I just want to stand up for my girl Bella there.
On the studio side, one of the things that I think is so interesting is, we're seeing independent studios like Sony, and they've been willing to really do co-productions and share in that ownership, which has helped them get shows on other networks. Do you think Warner Brothers is just going to have to follow suit at some point? I mean, I think I heard they had a slice of Training Day at CBS.
I have no idea what happens on the deal making front. I know all about vertical integration and all that. I also know that I believe we've put a new Warner Brothers show on our air every year for like 9 years, because in our 8-9 pilots that we shot, one of those that was from Warner, but the script was good enough to get shot, and the pilot was good enough to get ordered to series, and I think I couldn't speak to the rest of it. It's kind of, again, my job to hear the pitches and hopefully hand in like 8 great pilots, like 8 really good Blu-rays in May, and then somebody else makes the decisions. But I don't know. We hear pitches from literally every studio, and yeah, I know that some deal. I know our Jason Tatum show is from NBC Universal. I do know that CBS Studios has an ownership stake in that. Like, I know that stuff. I don't know. It kind of works itself out at least from where I work, in different departments, and I end up really happy with the stuff that gets on the schedule.
Kathleen, what about on the cable side? I mean, you guys have Westworld. I almost said
and Leftovers. Yeah, we have. Traditionally HBO loves to own its own content. We're obviously Warner Brothers our sister studio, but it doesn't mean that's any different than any other studio in terms of the deals or what have you. We don't get special treatment. But so we've always owned our own stuff. We definitely opened up to studio business once things started to get really competitive. That was, we felt like it was a smart move. There's good talent in-house. And I think to this point, we have a template for studio deals with everyone but Disney. Like, I think we've done I had a Jason Tatum's deal. Like, we've tried everything. Ultimately, I think we'd still like to own our own thing. So, we have Westworld and Leftovers, like you said, like good enough experiences. That's all great. But I think now, we're going to try to kick it old school a little and kind of just keep it clean. But we're not opposed, certainly, because there are great things coming. We would be silly to close the door and be like, no, we'll never do that.
Yeah, you've developed with Ryan Murphy, who's at 20th, and you're not going to say no
Exactly.
to Ryan Murphy coming in.
Yes, he'll be. I'm sure. Yeah.
For
Ryan
us,
and Jason, we're like, oh yes, for Ryan and Jason Tatum, we'll do it.
For us, we only have 10 hours of programming, so for our studio partners to give up any money or time slot of the CW network to another studio is just really difficult. So originally, when the CW first started, we were buying from other studios outside of our studio partners, and it just was proven not a great business. So we do miss out on a lot of other studios' projects, and that's a bummer. But we have 2 great, studios that we're happy with, and they have great deals, and so far so good.
You have like 30 shows on those 8 hours.
Yes, we do. You want to talk about that? Is that on your
So
roster? We try not to have repeats.
It's all year round, yo. The biggest story out of the upfronts this year was stacking rights, the digital play. How early are those conversations coming up in the development process?
What do you mean? Meaning like during like a pitch, or
Yeah,
how
are you hearing
what?
anything, like, is it, when you're looking at something from a different network, or a different studio, does it even come into play when you guys are hearing stuff?
No, I don't think so.
Not for me at all.
We sort of go creative first and then business.
We don't hear about it until the deal making gets going, and then business affairs can handle all that.
Yeah.
Thank God.
We've seen a couple of network jumpers this season. I don't know if you guys saw this morning, but Nashville is officially going to CMT with Hulu. And then, of course, follows Supergirl coming in from CBS to the CW. Is there a stigma that kind of comes with picking up something after another network has passed on it? I mean, you guys did Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which was originally developed for Showtime.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to tell me. Like, I don't know that it certainly doesn't bother me. I'm happy to pick off, and because we have a sort of difficult time competing financially with other places, I'm happy to, you know, to pick up something that hasn't or has worked either way. I mean, you know, Supergirl's working, and we're happy to have that. And if something was passed on like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend at Showtime, and that wasn't perfectly right for them, I kind of, in a friendly way, I'm like, we'll take it, you know. And if we can make it work, you know, we're happy to have it. I don't think the fans are, you know, obviously it's different when you're talking about a piece of development that the fans haven't seen yet. But what's weird about it is that I feel like so much of the audience doesn't necessarily know where it's on anyway. So it's like Nashville's back.
And if they're already, if they're already invested in
I love
that show, they
show.
just want it to keep going. I mean, I think you know, when Medium came over from NBC to CBS, I think we felt it immediately that the fans were just so excited that was going to continue going. We were happy to have it on the schedule.
Yeah, fans of Supergirl that, you know, are friends of mine are like, wait, is that on your net? No, it's now it is. I thought it was or wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, you don't always know, and they're just happy to have the show continuing, and so are we if it fits our brand.
I think it's an instance where the fans actually have a lot of power. When you switch a show, our show American Dad that was on Box for years moved to TBS and has been a huge success for them. And that's because they have a built-in die-hard audience. And because that audience showed up, they found it, from day one, it's kept that show afloat. And I think if you move a show that maybe does okay on a network, but doesn't have that built-in sort of die-hard audience, you're dead on the water.
Yeah.
You have to find those people who, no matter what, are gonna find your show. And that really helps. I think, yeah, some of the shows we mentioned, I think, will have just that, for sure.
And also creatively, just the trajectory there needs to be open field there too. So we have Mindy Project, and I think when we were looking at that, one, it does really well on Hulu, and she's great, and it's a great show, but that story was not even close to being done, you know, in terms of like where she wanted to go, what she wanted to explore comedically, but also just in terms of the plot, like what was going to happen with Danny and all this stuff. So for when we took it over, it was that our job was just not to mess it up. And
How much did the show change when it went to Hulu?
so what what we said was, do the show that you're doing. You guys know what you're doing. We're like, again, we just don't want to mess it up. But what we said was, these are like some toys that you can play with. Like the run times can be longer. You know, obviously be smart about making choices and don't be sort of gratuitous or self-indulgent. But like you have some time there. Also, comedically, if you want to try something, try it. And then in terms of character and story, you don't have to end the episode, because they asked me, you don't have to end the episode and tie it out, you know, up in a bow and be like, okay, this is the moral of the story. Like, Mindy could be confused, and like we can end the episode there, and you know, and that story can sort of take, you know, a season-long sort of journey. And we were in the writers' room. They're like, well, what if we get preempted? And I said, well, what? What does preempted mean? I didn't even know what it meant. Like, you know, if the president comes on, I'm like, what? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, do that. They're like, no, wait, what if we get preempted? I'm like, yeah, no, don't worry. Just, and then I pretended to hear something else, and I just left the room. But like, but I think it's just about, you know, the journey of the story, and if it just, you know, if the fans are there and the story has more legs.
I mean, do you see like the budgets change? Does that impact you guys at all in terms of when a show moves from one network to another? In terms of the creative?
Everyone's looking at me.
I haven't seen that. You know, I can't speak to the budgets changing. I think that's probably true for some shows. I think probably some studios would not take a show elsewhere if they couldn't get what they were making before. I can't speak anything specific, but I don't think that should affect the creative. I would hope not.
On the development side, one of the things that, you know, we talk about all the time is the copycat stuff. Usually where last year's trends become what you see everyone developing the year after. So right now, everything is the true crime stuff after the Jinx and Making a Murderer. How do you guys navigate trying to find new takes on that versus trying to not make a copycat show?
I mean,
Yes.
I feel like we do, yeah. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of we hear, I guess from above, I feel like, we need our empire, or we need our this, that, or the other thing. And I don't feel like, I think each thing is its own thing, So yes, there's trends, and yes, there's sort of zeitgeisty things, and there's also business reasons why certain types of creative work, for example, you talk about stacking, we all know about marathoning, we all know about, which changes the trends of serialized shows versus not serialized shows if people are watching in different ways, so there's trends in that way. But in terms of, a huge, dance show being big, I try, I feel like a good show is a good show. I try, and I prefer not to feel like I'm being derivative or copying somebody else, so I almost stay away from stuff that hits on other places, I would say.
What about in terms of trying to right now, comic book shows are everywhere, obviously, on CW, but ABC's got Marvel and Netflix has their own Marvel deal. CBS really how much was the Supergirl part of trying to lean in and saying, well, we need a comic book show?
That was just a pitch. I mean, it was just a pitch. It was just a great pitch. We loved the idea maybe of what Greg and the whole team talked about wanting to explore with her. And so we didn't set out to say we've got to find a way to get a superhero show, a comic book on our air. It really wasn't some agenda. It was, wow, on that day when they walked in, and again, it's Warner Brothers walking in with Greg Berlanti. I'm not going to pretend that it was, just anybody off the street. These were big producers with a big property, but you're still holding it to the same standard as the rest. And I don't know, we loved the pitch and bought it in the room, and yeah, and I think a lot of other places did as well, from what I understand.
I think one of the benefits of Peak TV is really the increase in diversity, both on screen especially. How has the increase in new voices really affected the kind of stuff that you're looking for? I mean, are you hearing a lot more new stuff with diversity at the center of the theme, or is there a mandate there at your respective networks or studios?
I think, we kind of started this conversation off about, standing out, and I think it's a nice time where it makes business sense and also creative sense to really lean into voices that you've never heard before. And so, especially in the comedy world, it's like you're always, the same joke can be told by two different people, and one is really funny and one is not, and that comes down to the voice. And if we're hearing the same voices on TV or in movies or in music or whatever it is, it's just going to get stale, and then you see a new voice come along and it just stands out. So it actually makes good business sense, and I think all of us creatively just dig that stuff too. So it's kind of a nice time for all of that, I think.
Yeah, I think the TV audience now is bigger than ever because there is so much content, there's so many outlets, and people have access to it everywhere, that what you put out there has to be reflective of who's watching. And I think shows like Fresh Off the Boat, Blackish, the list goes on and on of shows that didn't exist, so you didn't pull that audience. Now there's a whole new group of people who are watching these shows. It's like, oh, that was like my life growing up. They couldn't necessarily relate to the same old show they've seen for the last 50 years. So I think it's necessary for the business, but it's also great because it does develop new voices that you haven't heard. People at home will be watching and be like, oh, I could tell a story like that. I think the more the better. We're a very diverse country. You just go walk down the street, and it just makes sense to me.
I think that's a big thing. I think the sort of the broadened accessibility of television, to Grant's point, it used to be like an old boys club. It just was. It was inaccessible as a job. I think many of us came from, I come from New Jersey. It wasn't like a job to go to Hollywood. You know what I mean? It wasn't something you could do. And I think now that there's so much more knowledge about storytelling and where you can go to tell your stories. It's just the breadth of the things agents are bringing are just they're from people with experiences from everywhere, which is exciting. So. Feels like it's changing and it feels like it's shifting in a good way, and the sort of the loud conversation about it is only helping us get those people jobs, quite frankly, and pay them to tell their story. So good.
We're going to open it up for audience questions. Any questions? Standing up. There's a mic coming your way.
A lot of times when you hear interviews with established writers, they will talk about the notes process, and there will be times that they discuss that process as being somewhat dissonant with what they see their show. And I'd kind of like to hear y'all's side of it, because obviously development executives are very thoughtful in what you're putting on your air. And what's your side of giving a note that's maybe not well accepted?
Excellent question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Brian?
Bryan. I don't know what you're talking about. They always tell me they love my notes. This must be about these four. Look, again, we have a lot of things in development, right? I said we buy 45, 50 things. That's, each of those has a story area, document, an outline, a script, a draft, several drafts, get into the cuts. Hopefully, my notes are just trying to help shepherd it to be the best thing that it is going to be. We're very conscious of not trying to turn shows into something that they aren't. I don't need to buy 50 things and try to turn them all into the same thing that I think we need, that one thing that I'm looking for. We bought the pitch. The pitch had its own integrity, and we have a lot of years of experience in our department at CBS and at the studio, and hopefully I think we're giving some really good guidance. And I think a lot of the showrunners, and I can only speak to the pilot process, obviously it goes over to current when you get into episode 2 through 200, but for the pilot, I think there's a lot of steps, and hopefully we're just helping kind of shepherd the writer through that entire 8, 9, 10-month process.
I mean, for us, again, it's the brand manager thing. We just know, based on what our audience has sparked to in the past and what has worked for them in the past, we try to give guidance along those lines. It might be, we tend to have a love triangle, and in that love triangle, there's like the third person, and they're just not a viable option, for example. It feels like, well, you're obviously going to go for the other guy or girl or whatever it is, and so, we would highly recommend that you build up the other person. So there's certain things that we just know that potentially, having developed like 500 pilots, that help the writer, we really do feel like we try to be super respectful, that we know that those writers had a very specific vision, and so we're just merely saying, look, as fresh eyes to this fresh eyes to this project, this is the way we're looking at. So usually notes are, something's confusing, and confusion is death. Like, that's really, really bad for the audience, at least for us. If you're confused, then you sort of tune out fast. So we're confused about that. That's really important. Particularly just plot-wise, but also character-wise. We're not understanding what you're trying to get across to your audience. So it's really always mindful of, or we try to be as mindful as we can of, we're trying to help you with your specific vision, but we want the audience to understand what that vision is. That coupled with, here's what we think our audience needs, but really at the end of the day, and I've had many, back and forths with writers, and we back off. We're like, okay, if that's what you really think, we're just telling you what we see and trying to be as helpful as we can, but we know we're hiring this writer because we love this writer, and the writer is king in TV.
I think the best notes conversations that everybody are the ones that are more like a conversation, where you can function as if you're on the same team, because in the day you both want to get a show on the air. There is a stigma to the notes process where it almost seems like the writer versus the suits. And it's too bad, and it shouldn't ever be that way, because you're all on the same team, you have the same thing in mind. We're protecting the investment, but we want the best story, just like the writer does. And you have to find that middle ground, but ultimately you're right, you want to find, you're paying them a lot of money to tell a story. You want that voice. You're paying for the voice. At the end of the day, they should win. They get that way, unless there's something that if it's a production issue where you're like, their choice is going to cost you $2 million for a big explosion, they're not going to win that one. Right. But otherwise, there's ways to do stuff sort of within the bounds. But I think you've got to function as a team. I think most good relationships work that way.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think it's just sort of obvious that, like, if the show we're working on is working, that's really good for me. Do you know what I mean? That means like I keep my job another year. So we are on the same team, and I think, to your point, my position is just I bought the show or whatever. I'm the first fan. I'll react to it if something's. I'm your first and biggest fan. I'll tell you what I think. You do with it what you will. The best I can always ask for is you being like, I'll look at that. I'm never going to demand that you take my note or my fix or my suggestion or whatever. But as long as if I've made you think, then I feel like we're on the same team, and it's an open dialogue.
In the front.
Speaking to Voices. I read an article really quickly that said that in the new season, the showrunners are 90% white and 80% male. So are you seeing more diverse people pitching in the room, and what initiatives are there for diverse voices to be in the room?
I mean, we just have such a strong interest in kind of everything these guys were saying in hearing new voices, and that's part of new voices. I mean, I think clearly what you're seeing, and with the statistics, of course, is catch up. I shouldn't say just, because it sucks, and it should be quicker, but it really is catch up. It's that, you know, showrunners is a nearly impossible job. I mean, it really is like running a, you know, $1 million corporation with no experience, and there's so many I mean, not obviously over the years, but if, you know, at the first time. And so if you know, when you're learning a million different things. So now these showrunners have been doing that job for 10 years, you know, and that's why they've been rehired by all of us, because they have experience. We try very hard to hire, you know, staff writers and story editors and all the way up, so that in a few years, you know, those people will catch up, and that, you know, it will reflect, you know, the audience, and it will reflect society. Now is just catch up. But to do our jobs well and increase diversity, you know, we really try hard. I mean, we do have mandates on our writing staffs to have, to include diversity, and that's for all the reasons that they mentioned. It's just to have a voice in the room that reflects, you know, different ways that people think. I mean, I heard this story once that just I'd like to share because it really resonated, and it was about a tech company that, not yours, it was a tech company that, you know, they were trying to upload an app, and they just couldn't, and for some reason, like half of the pictures were upside down, and they just couldn't figure out what was going on and what was wrong. And it turned out that it was because all of the people who were programming and uploading this app were right-handed, and it just so it's like all the left-handed people that were using this function it was becoming upside down. So it just makes you think. It's just really just another point of view that's so new. It's just a neutral thing, but it's not a judgment. It's just a different point of view to make sure that you're looking at things all different ways. And to us, you know, that's in front of the camera, behind the camera. You know, in the olden days, it's like not every doctor is a man, and you know, not every scientist is a man, you know, or white or whatever. Everybody can be anything, and we look at that particularly because we have a younger audience, and so we want to encourage, you know, the teens and the 20-somethings and the 18 to 34 to know that they can be anything they want to be.
Friend? This will be the last question.
Pressure. Earlier you mentioned accessibility, and I heard you say what the agent brings. Does anyone have a great success story of something that came through a non-traditional route, or something that popped out of nowhere, maybe a web series coming to life, or something to give every individual creator out there a little inspiration?
One of the projects that I worked on, still to this day, one of my favorite projects is a documentary series called Behind the Mask that we did. It's about sports mascots, and it's actually really funny. And the first day I got to my desk, my boss said, "Can you just look at this really quickly? We're not going to do a stupid show about mascots. Just look at it, and we're probably going to pass. Can you just take care of it?" And I looked at it, and I saw the director, and I'm like, oh, this director, he had done a bunch of cool web stuff, but like he was one of those few people where it was like, okay, he made one thing, and then the next thing was a little bit better, and then the next thing was a little bit better, and then the next thing was worse. But then he made another one, and so he had the camera on, and he was creating. And so I asked my boss if we could just figure this out, because I did think there might be a sort of world where this guy is, again, about the storyteller, not necessarily the story. I'm like, can we give this guy a shot? And I think we were able to do that, especially then, because we were working with we had to be very aggressive, and I think we're trying to do that now, but we're in the age of, you know, these big packages coming in, so it's harder to get that through. But he was able to, he had the time, we were able to give him the time to find the show and not just pass outright on it. And he made a great series, and it earned Hulu its first sports Emmy. So it was, this guy came out of nowhere, and just, you know, and now he's working and doing a bunch of other stuff for us and has movie deals and stuff. So he definitely, like, it's just, I think the learning, at least for me from that, was just keep the camera on, keep writing, like keep the, you know, final draft open, like just keep creating.
We got in a giant bidding war for Extant And that was, the writer, Mickey, had no representation, nothing. He sat down in a coffee shop, had that idea, and wrote it, and got it to an assistant at an agency who read it and then recommended it to a boss, and next thing you know, it went to the kind of the highest up agents, and then other agents got word. I mean, it became kind of a feeding frenzy for his representation, and then it was out in the marketplace, I mean, 3 days later at every network, streamer, everybody. And it was a real story there of him just writing something that people connected to.
I'm going to kick myself in the face for not remembering this, but Casual, the show actually came from that too. If you look up the writer's credits, Xander Lehman, he has his one credit is Casual. Well, no, you're ruining my story. But we made it. But he, this was a guy who just wrote, they developed with fancy HBO. But he wrote a script just on spec, and then Jason Reitman, who doesn't like to do TV and just wanted to do sort of independent films, was attracted to this voice, and we made it.
I will say one thing just in terms of advice, if you're asking about agents, my favorite advice to give to your point you brought up, I think agent assistants are the way to go. Rather than getting your stuff to I will say this because I used to be one, agents assistants want to be promoted, so they are hustling and they will hustle for you for free. And so and they want to impress their boss, they want to impress the department, so if you don't worry about agents, start with the assistant. That's my advice.
Agree.
Yeah.
Second. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to you guys for coming out. Thank you, ATX.